gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us here at the Green Bharat Summit. Of course, it's been a great day of conversations, hearing the likes of Amitabh Kant, Nitin Gadkari, and top industry veterans from the automotive industry. Clearly, we're at an inflection point. 5 years ago, I don't think we would have imagined price parity with ICE, but now we are seeing that. Look at what's happening in the market. You've got leading OEMs like Tata Motors, Mahindra, Ola Electric, TVS, Bajaj Auto, Hero, Honda, you name it. All of them are bringing out electric vehicles which are almost priced at parity with electric vehicles, with the ICE counterparts. So this is definitely an important moment for the industry. We currently have around 28 lakh EVs in India, but as an S&P report points out, the EV outlook for India, they feel that India may not have 30% EV penetration by 2030. In fact, the penetration may just be about 18%. Even Amitabh Kant today said that we're lagging behind China and many other countries, and we are 5 years behind. So clearly there is a lot to be done. And what's holding us back? Let's kick this off with Mr. Vipin Sondhi. Mr. Sondhi, let me begin by asking you for an industry view. You're someone who's been spending a lot of time brainstorming with the industry, brainstorming with policy makers about what needs to be done. 28 lakh EVs, a good milestone, but we're nowhere close to the 30% mark as yet. In fact, our ambition should be much more. What's holding us back, according to you?
No, I think, this is about both policy and while manufacturers are being looked at as well, I think we have to strengthen the ecosystem. At the end of the day, EVs is about ecosystem, so it's all together. What's also important to see is, let me pick up a few things. There's nobody more inspiring than the minister himself. So it's important to bring him on stage as often as you can in different states as well. If there's a clarity of vision, and there are areas which are not clear as well, but it inspires people. And I believe it's more about inspiration than anything else. But let me pick up, I'll come to your point later, but let me pick up 6 things that if we are to be number one as is envisioned, it can't be domestic market alone. It has to be a combination of domestic and the overseas market as well. So I'll pick up just 6 points, and then we'll come to specific policy issues. Number one, charging infra definitely is something that we are going to look at. Battery tech and recycling. Third is R&D and clusterization of R&D, bringing industry, academia onto industrial parks so that we can look at the technology of the future. Policy must address that. Fourth, a policy for startups and SMEs. We talk about them, we don't have an integrated policy. Fifth, integrating with global standards. Santosh Iyer just mentioned about the fact that there's a disparity in NCAP, that's safety standards. If we aspire to be Atmanirbhar, which is part of the global manufacturing supply chain, we must integrate with global standards. And finally, very importantly, a cross-sector collaboration between automobiles, between energy, IT. It's the ecosystem that we have to develop. I'll just take a minute and then stop. Transport is a concurrent subject which makes implementation sometimes a challenge, which is why you need a visionary leader articulating all the time. But there are compelling benefits to having a consistent policy framework. It may not be unified, but it should be consistent so that the transition is impactful. Just 3 points there. Citizens of all states must have access to the benefits. It was also said taxation at the local level, at the state level is different. All citizens don't have that access. Secondly, consistent policy has to make sure that EV adoption across states address the current disparities in the states that there is. And thirdly, standardization of policies will ensure the availability of equipment, infrastructure, and charging stations. I'll stop here, but when we come back, I'd like to talk about power and the policy on power.
You're absolutely right, sir, because when you move from state to state in the country, the regulatory ecosystem changes. The kind of subsidies you have on electric vehicles, different kinds of vehicles, that changes. The capital subsidies that you're giving on manufacturing, that's different. The taxation changes. And as you said, power tariffs, land use policies, everything is different. And that's what sometimes complicates things for global investors as well. Mr. Saikant Verma, I'd like to get you in at this stage. Do you think, just the way we have a GST, can we have a one nation, one EV policy? Is that even feasible?
I think that is not only something that we would want, but it is pretty essential at this point of time, because I think like Sir was just saying, what we need is a clear visibility. I mean, there are different stakeholders that are involved, whether it is the EV manufacturers, whether there are public transportation suppliers, or logistic sectors, or mass transport, or even individual transportation users. There's battery manufacturing and a whole bunch of stakeholders which are involved. Now, what we need to give is some sort of a visibility as to what they are going to get across the nation. Because when you talk about all these stakeholders, they're not going to come and target a particular state. They're going to come for the entire country. Only then the economic scale would work out, and they'll be able to, take advantage of that. And I think one nation, one EV policy is definitely that way, is going to give them that sort of a visibility. And they can, chart out a clear roadmap in terms of what they can plan for the next 5 years, 10 years, and, whether it is building the infrastructure, which is pretty essential, for EV to take off in a big way. So I think it is not only something, a good to have factor, but it is very, very much essential. And just like how, there are many examples. You're just quoting about the GST. I think that is one of the very successful structures or models that we as a nation have come together and built it. I think in that context, EV policy for the entire country is definitely something that is very much essential. And only that will give us the ability to, have experience in exponential growth and to be able to achieve whatever targets that we're talking about, 30% or even 50%. And I think India as a country, we should target towards 100%.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Uttar Pradesh, which has the largest number of MPs in the Lok Sabha, one of India's largest states. Prerna, I would like to ask you about EV penetration in Uttar Pradesh. A state like UP has tried to align its policy, electric vehicle push policy, very much with the central government. But if I were to ask you a larger question about how bureaucracy functions differently across the country, which are some of the basic hurdles that you see at the level of governance, at the level of regulations, which are perhaps holding back widespread EV adoption in the country? What, according to you, would be some of those 2-3 hurdle points?
The Uttar Pradesh state, under the leadership of Honorable Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath ji, is very well aligning with the national policy which we have. So the Uttar Pradesh Electric Vehicle Manufacturing and Mobility 2022 policy, it's very much in sync with the FAME or the PM E-Seva Yojana which we hear about. And when we talk of these schemes, when you talk of the alignment thing, we are now looking at faster adoption of electric vehicles. We are now looking at providing lucrative space for investors, for businesses, so that there is a holistic ecosystem of electric vehicles. Now, coming to the challenges we face, it is the first thing which I would mention is the charging infrastructure. The charging infrastructure here, of course, the upstream infrastructure has a great cost to it. But now, if the government is now subsidizing, incentivizing the infrastructure, because if it doesn't do, then the burden will fall on the consumer, and the entire concept of green technology or electrical vehicles will fall short, because we want to promote that people use EVs. We want to promote because we want to reduce our energy we want to reduce our energy import bill. We want to enhance our energy security. We want to go green. We want to have better air quality. And for all of that, the charging infrastructure, not only the cost is one issue. The second issue is that we need to have it at regular intervals. Now, the electric vehicle policy which we have in UP, it emphasizes that on expressways we should have it at 25 kilometers, every 25 kilometers. Or if we look at the internal road network in the cities, then we want it in 1 into 1 square meter. But how do we identify suitable locations for it? How do we identify land for it? We need to acquire land. We need to bear the land cost. We do have great subsidies and incentives when it comes to stamp duty reimbursement, or when we talk of
Road tax waivers.
the road tax waivers or the registration charges waivers. We definitely have that in the policy, but this is another important obstacle and important challenge we are wanting to address, because cities are becoming very congested. I am posted in Greater Noida. Of course, it's a very well-planned city, and we see that the road network is very wide. It's all very green and nice. Might not be that big an issue for us, but for the other cities, if we look at them, we want to transition about 100% of our public transport into EV, or the official vehicles into EV by 2030. Those are ambitious targets, and for that we really need to look at the infrastructure hurdles, like I talked of, the cost, the land suitability, then the electricity tariffs. Do we have that kind of electricity infrastructure? Because the grid and substations will also need to be revamped. They will also need to be strengthened. So do we, how are we going to go about it? So I think these are the major obstacles we face, and we are in line, to address these issues.
Okay, Mr. Abhijeet, as Ms. Prerna and Ms. Saikant pointed out, and we've got two senior bureaucrats from both Uttar Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh. Interesting thing is, you go to any state in the country, everyone would say that we would want Tesla to come and manufacture here. While the jury is still out on whether Tesla will come and finally start manufacturing in India, or just begin retail operations, the fact is every state is competing. Every state wants to give the right incentives to manufacturers, give subsidies on electric vehicles, hybrids, but we don't have a coherent EV policy. When we speak about a coherent EV policy, or one nation, one EV policy, what does that need to contain? Because when we're talking about policy right now, we're talking about subsidies, and subsidies cannot last forever.
First of all, many congratulations to Network 18 team for bringing this content on a very visible and very direct mode that we need a national EV policy. The need may have been discussed behind the curtain for a long period, but now since it has came, and again you had Mr. Amitabh Kant sir in the morning, and then now you had Gadkari ji. Both of them, they are the leadership voices who has given almost outlined both in the morning the challenges that we are facing and the places where we are curve, or our speed or pace has lacked content, or sometime transition speed. And also what Gadkari ji just now said is where we are expecting to reach to. So if you will ask me that what is about not having an EV policy, I'm the one who's getting maximum hit, because I'm not having a national EV policy. Two major points which we have as a national ambition, Minister has also spoken, and that is to reduce your logistic cost. And when it comes to logistic, we are not talking or referring here one state. The transition of an electric mobility fleet, or a hydrogen truck, or electric truck, or e-highway, all of them, they have to cross multiple states. And the companies who are also going to pick up. So recently we have Amazon starting and announcing 100 EVs. Ultratech, few days back, they also had announced 100 EVs. These are the companies who had to spend a significant amount of time to understand which state, what type of conditions, what type of tariff, what type of subsidies. If we would have a national policy who gives equivalent tariff of the EV charging, at least for the vehicle. Second, the power disbursement and also the power connection, which also becomes a big problem when we go for permissions of such charging stations or highways. It is varying state to state. All regulators, they have to come together. And when it comes to give a single window clearance, it is impacting the way we want to reduce our logistic cost. And second is what we are having as a lowest hanging fruit. Sir said 40% of the pollution or emission is attributed to the transport. Out of that 40%, which is the 100% of our country, 30% is alone attributed to trucks. So this year when we had FAME, we included 500 crore rupees for trucks dedicatedly to meet that deployment target of to claim that 500 crore rupees. Ease of doing business also given 500 crore rupees for the viability gap funding. And to meet both of them together, if you will see what is the exact translation of how a state will be able to pick up is actually the ease of mobility. No matter what amount of road we will be able to create to connect cities, the moment you eat or reach to a city, you face all that congestion. You may go from here to Kanyakumari, but the moment you reach to city, your circular road or your transition road is not in a proper mode to actually surpass the city without getting slowed down. So that obstacle of mobility is what our focus. GNSS tolling हो या फिर e-highway हो, hydrogen bus or electric bus, whatever is to be brought to make the mobility freight lower, it is priority. And any of these are not possible until and unless we have a comprehensive nationwide ambition. And plus, I would also, if time allows us, to speak about climate financing. Without having a proper single window clearance, which dispense a long-term finance for such infrastructure upgradation, it would be for, as a country, very ambitious to have a vision like this, which I think in morning, Kant sir has very well outlined. And last but not least, these transitions are keeping us in a neck-to-neck competition with Germany. When we started 3 years back, we were ahead of Germany into making 5,500 kilometer e-highway on Bharatmala and Sagarmala. Germany had a target of 4,000 by 2030. Now, with some advancement into certain areas like power, distribution, and solid-state transformers, we went ahead to complete our targets by 2027 only. And solar is also contributing. But when it comes to creating an infrastructure of dispensability, what Mr. Saab said is 470 wayside amenities, we will have to have a comprehensive policy that state consumes each one of them as an asset which is earning for them.
Okay, thank you for those very comprehensive remarks. And Mr. Sondhi, to come back to you, when we speak about the necessary contours of a one nation, one EV policy, would you say that continuity of policy and streamlined policies all across the country for the power sector would be the most essential? Because even now, when we speak about adoption of EVs, they say the biggest puzzle that we need to fill is charging.
You're absolutely right. I think just to first, how do we arrive at a more unified policy with it still being a concurrent subject? And I think there should be dashboards created by the central government, which are in each state government, to highlight and showcase the best EV policies around the country. CII is doing some work on it. So you create a healthy competition so that each state is learning from the other, and we approach unification even though it may not be formalized. Coming back to power, and that remains probably the single most important thing. You know, there are solutions to it. One is, how do you manage peak load and EV charging impact? We like to charge in areas that we know rather than in public charging. So the chances are electricity demand typically peaks between 6 and 9 p.m. and that coincides with us reaching home from office when most people would plug in their EVs. So this added demand would strain the grid, which is what the power sector or the discoms are concerned about. Now, I think a coherent EV policy would work on managing charging times and encouraging EV users to stagger their charging during off-peak hours. And there are ways to do it through incentives. The second is smart charging and a tariff arrangement. We have smart meters now. We have the ability of digital. We can easily find out which are the peaks, which are the troughs, which smart meters, and automatically the user will shift to times when he or she has to pay the least. There are ways of managing it. Technology is there. One last point, since we've got two people from the States, is modification of building codes for charging infrastructure. I think if we can do that to facilitate builders, etc., in residential accommodation it would become easier to create the charging infrastructure within residential and commercial premises on a planned manner. I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Sonti. Saikant, if we were to ask you about how we can go about having a cohesive nationwide policy, if you had to put a thinking cap on, how would you start towards that?
I think, you know, when we are targeting for a one nation, one EV policy, like what Sir was saying, whether it is a power sector or whether it is the urban planning.
Because the goal of every state is the same.
Yes.
You know.
No, I think the couple of points here that we need to keep in mind is whenever we are drafting this one nation, one EV policy, because it's not just pertaining to the transport sector alone, it cuts across various sectors, whether it is power sector or whether it is urban planning, what Sir was just rightly pointing out. I mean, we need to give some sort of a base structure as to what every state should look at. And when we have a very aggressive targets at a nation level that we want to, you know, probably go at 30% by 2030 and 100% at some point of time, that basic structure should set the target for each and every state, cutting across different spaces, whether it is urban space, whether it is a building code, whether it is, you know, the power sector, how can we ensure that, you know, the charging infrastructure, we are able to give that sort of a confidence to the charging infrastructure players to make sure that there is a consistent and reliable power supply and all of these things. So that base structure is very, very essential. And today, you know, aligning with this national vision, there are very few states who are able to see that, you know, that far. And Andhra Pradesh is one of the states, I mean, we recently have launched a EV policy wherein the state has set a very, very ambitious target that it wants to achieve in the next 5 years. For example, 100% of the public road transport corporation that we have got, 100% of these vehicle fleet, which is around 15,000 vehicles, all of that is going to go EV in the next 5 years. That's a pretty ambitious target. Now, barring, you know, we cannot just leave that for the states to decide and pick up, because sometimes at a national level, it's very important that you're able to give that sort of an ambitious target for all the states. And that I think is what the, you know, the national EV policy should target for, to make sure that, you know, every state is able to take this particular thing as seriously as it should. And, you know, the other thing is, you know, talking about the incentive should not only restrict in terms of, you know, attracting the manufacturers, because every state is now, has become very competitive. They are just, you know, willing to throw away as much money as possible in terms of incentives so that they're able to attract the infrastructure, the manufacturing players. But I think this is one sector which goes beyond all of that. It's not just about giving incentives, but it is also about, you know, providing a comprehensive framework and, you know, giving that sort of a national visibility. Because like I said, you know, when you're talking about EV manufacturers, they're not going to, you know, take, for example, Andhra alone as a case study.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, that's the kind of a framework which we need to look at when we're talking about the national level EV policy.
Right. Mr. Abhijeet, if we were to speak about ease of doing business, and One Nation, One EV policy is about ease of doing business, what are the other aspects that we need to streamline much more? What are some of the global examples that we can take as we are trying to work towards a journey? Currently, there is a major consultation on in the government about having a new automotive mission plan for 2047. Do you think we should be speaking about a One Nation, One EV policy for 2047?
Not only EV policy, but policies in respect of all concluding and dependently ministries, they are coming together. Dashboard is something which we tried in 2 years back, and now subsidies, since they are getting into sync, and we are looking at those possibilities that we may have overlooked. So expecting a country and the people to buy EV is one way of doing it, and expecting people to use EV is the other way of doing it. But you will be able to give them to use EV if somebody is going to buy EV and give them as a fleet operator. Blue Smart is a very good example of doing it. Then you have a lot of bus companies who have done. But in last 10 years, if you look at the policy, have we dispensed any ease of doing business to fleet operator or to infra? Majority of disbursement has gone to either to government institutions who have taken charges and who have taken infrastructure, or automobile manufacturers. So looking at who is actually going to help me in the agenda to reduce my climate expenditure, also my import of oil, and who is going to stand with me to increase the adoption. What Khan sir said, don't look at the number, look at the percentage. So if you look at the percentage, then percentage indicates towards the truck. So truck is what we brought into the center stage. Percentage also says that look at the adoption ratio. And adoption is not possible until and unless you create a very adoptable commercial equivalence to all industries who are currently using diesel. And how do we do it is absolutely there is no other way of conducting more and more commercial pilots, giving them an adoptability in the rate-to-rate basis that you don't spend anything. Still, I'm putting you off on a non-EV, non-fossil fuel transport system, and also a charge for your industry, for your MSME, your household to switch to renewable energy. And these two will be possible only with the conflict of commercial equivalence. Finance Ministry would have a very, very huge role to promote it, to bring each one of them together that you are my go-to person to get this done.
Right. Ms. Prerna, what can be the starting point? Having any kind of unified policy is always a very tricky conversation. One nation, one election is a very tricky conversation with different political parties. But when we speak about one cohesive electric vehicle policy all across the country, what is the starting point? How can the government begin these discussions? Because at the end of the day, the bureaucrats will have to make such a policy and convince other states to come on board.
I think, of course, one nation, one EV policy, it's extremely essential, and it should just begin with a consultative, collaborative platform where we can have experts, we can have bureaucrats, we can have industry partners, just everybody come together from various states and work out the best model, whichever is possible. When we talk of Uttar Pradesh, we are also providing for great subsidies, incentives, everything. But then what people want is that there should be seamless travel. If they're traveling from UP to Rajasthan to Madhya Pradesh, they want the charging infrastructure to be very much seamless, to be very much properly available. So all these states need to come together and work out their power tariffs, work out their incentive policy, work out their, the waivers they can give for loans or for subsidies, incentives, all of these together. And also, there are some very good models which we find abroad also, which can again be studied. And now almost all the states have a good framework already prepared, which everybody has policies, and they're all doing their tenders. They're all making sure that we have players who are coming and putting up these charging infrastructure, or people who are coming and manufacturing electric vehicles. So these all stakeholders can come together and discuss and then just roll out the best policy possible.
Right. So lots of takeaways there. Clearly, this panel believes that yes, we do need a one nation, one EV policy for greater adoption to meet our climate goals and also to get the best investments. Clearly, there needs to be more discussion between the center and the states. We'll have to leave it there. We've completely run out of time. But I'd like to thank our stellar panelists for joining us today and leaving our audience with a lot to think about.